I'm going to talk to you today about something that's individually beneficial, economically feasible, morally sound, socially responsible, and absolutely the right thing to do. I'm going to talk to you about 3 of my citizen heroes who took those 5 things and created the community they wanted to live in through the power of walking. Now, when I was raised in the 60s and 70s, now that was the late 60s and early 70s, everybody walked to school. Moms and dads belonged to church organizations and service clubs, and everybody's mom was part of the Parent Teachers Association. There was a kind of community and social connectiveness through social service. Robert Putnam, in his book Bowling Alone, which was written over 20 years ago, talked about the fact that in society, when you look at your contacts outside of your work and your home, there are only 2 people that you are seeing on a face-to-face basis, on a weekly basis. And think about that. He wrote that 20 years ago. And that's where walking comes in. If you are walking on a sidewalk or in a city, you are increasing your chance of having personal interfacing, face-to-face eye contact and connections with other people you see on the street. Walking is also sustainable. It's carbon neutral. It's also inexpensive. All it costs is a really good pair of walking shoes. Walking is also our connection to this place, to the sky, to the earth, and it's something our parents, and indeed our ancestors have done. Walking is just quite simply the right thing to do. And if you create really good walking environments, you are creating environments that are also accessible to people that are wheeling in a wheelchair or using a stroller or pushing a stroller. It's just morally sound. So Peter and Midori in East Vancouver knew this, and for them it started with a bench. And by the way, because I'm Canadian, I've been told that I don't say bench correctly, so I'm going to be saying bench. Okay. I was a city planner in East Vancouver, and I was charged with making a 40-block stretch of street, 40 blocks, into a neighborhood, community, wonderful street. I didn't know how to do this, and I didn't know how to do it with no money. Windsor Street on those 40 blocks was bisected several times by major arterial roads. It had street racing. It had people trying to go through and rat race through the neighborhood. It also had illegal drug activity, and it had prostitution. It also had 3 schools and 4 parks, but you're not sending your kid down that street. But Peter had a solution, and Peter had placed a bench outside of his house. And his house was right in the area where there was quite a lot of prostitution occurring. So I went up to Peter's door and I knocked on it and I said, "Peter, that's just so wonderful that you put a bench on the street." And Peter said, "You know, there's something really curious happening with that bench. It is not the prostitutes that are using it. It's the old couple that aren't driving anymore, that are walking all the way up to the grocery store, and they're coming back and they're halfway and they're sitting on this bench and resting. And it's also the grandparents that are coming and they're just sitting on the bench in the sun, waiting for the school across the street to get out. And they're coming and they're sitting on this bench." And he said, "You know, the bench was the right thing to do." And then he looked at me and he said, "You know what? I always worry when Peter says, 'Do you know what?' In between the curb and the sidewalk in front of every house along Windsor Street are what we call the City Boulevard. It's a grass strip, and it's between the curb and the sidewalk, and it varies from sometimes 6 feet, sometimes it can go up to 30 feet wide, and a city owns it, and it's always grassed. And each neighbor in front of each section mows their little section of grass." And Peter said to me, "You know, it would really build community if we could just garden that little section in between each of the houses." And I looked at Peter and I said, "No." And I gave him the city response, which is, all the ductwork, the pipework, the things that make the city run and make your house glow, they all run under that section. And we can't have you digging into that, because if you dig into it, you might hit something, and that's just not good. Because you wouldn't be hitting oil, but you'd be hitting the city infrastructure. So Peter said, oh. And then I went away, and I felt bad about it, and I thought about it, and I thought, Peter's right. If we could find a way to garden each of these sections, it provides, you'd have an area between the curb and sidewalk that's garden that'd be beautiful. Everyone could come out, it would be community, you'd have something else to talk to besides, or to talk about other than the prostitution and how bad the street is. And then I got a solution. So I went to Peter, I said, I've got a solution, Peter. And I realized that the City of Vancouver has all the green waste that's collected from all the neighbors. It goes away to the magical place called the landfill, and it's made into fabulous soil, composted soil. It's great, great soil. And I said to Peter, I'm going to send dump trucks full of this soil out. And we're going to have massive dig in and dig out parties, and we're going to take each section of Windsor Street, and we're going to close it off and have massive street parties, and we're all going to come out, and we're all going to help each other build these gardens. And the way we're going to get around it, we're going to mound the soil up. So the soil is going to be 3 feet above the line where all the city services are, way below. So when we plant the plants, which I will get from a grant, a small grant, then we'll have this incredible planted street. So we called the program Blooming Boulevards because everything needs to have a name. And we also called it a demonstration project. So if you are doing projects with planners, or if you're a planner, or if you're a member of a community, call it a demonstration project with the city, they will approve it. So, and we went out, we started to dig up. The idea just went wild. People started having these massive parties. They bring their barbecues out in the middle of the street. They would dig up each other's yards. And in Vancouver, there's a lot of people that don't speak English. But what Peter said, and I always think of this, he says, everybody speaks the language of plants. And so everybody would come out, and even if they didn't speak the same language, they would exchange plants, and people started to walk on the street because they had things to talk about, they had separation from the traveled portion of the road, and everybody, of course, wanted to see what the other person was doing. And it started to take off. And it took off in a way that Windsor Street then went ahead and adopted a little vacant lot that was owned by the city and made a little pedestrian park in it. And then it went a step farther. They got a grant from the city to do public art on the street poles. And then other communities, other cities, and other neighborhoods in Vancouver wanted to have the Blooming Boulevard program. Well, today, Blooming Boulevards is done throughout the city as city policy in any single family housing area. Windsor Street, which was starting to look really good and now connecting all those schools and parks together, was looking so good it became a bikeway. And the good part of being a bikeway is you get more traffic calming, which means what I didn't have money to do, which is to make a traffic calm neighborly street, they now had. Well, Peter and Midori have received many, many accolades for the work that they did. But the one that I'm proudest of is they received the Great Vancouver Award for being the best neighbor from the Greater Vancouver Neighborhood House Association. And they truly were people that knew it was morally right and responsible to create the community they wanted to live in through the power of walking. Now, when you look at the economic feasibility of walking, you can look at it 2 ways. One is from a resident's perspective, and one, of course, is the business owner. For a resident, if you live in a walkable community, you are spending 50% less on your transportation costs. You are twice as likely to have really good blood pressure, and you're much, much more likely to be fit. My friend and colleague, Dr. Larry Frank, that teaches at the University of British Columbia, did a massive, massive survey and study. And he found some really interesting things when he started talking to people that lived in cities and people that lived in suburban environments. he found that 2/3 of people in urban environments and almost half of people in suburban environments wanted to live in a walkable community that connected their schools, shops, and services. Furthermore, he found in surveying that 52% of everybody he surveyed said that they would accept a smaller housing size if they were within 5 kilometers or roughly 2 miles of schools, shops, and services. Now, the news for businesses is also really good. In the city of Toronto, they took out a curb lane of parking in the downtown and they put in expanded walking facilities and a bike lane. Well, the businesses justifiably were really upset. But what they found was that 90% of their clientele started coming by walking, biking, and transit. And furthermore, even at peak times, only 80% of the parking was occupied. And the best part, the people that came by biking, walking, and transit, they came more often and they spent more per month than people that traveled by cars. City of New York has similar statistics. People that value walking and transit over parking spend 5 times as much at businesses in New York. In Union Square North, they expanded the walking facilities and they found that the store vacancies went down by 50%. On Pearl Street, they took out a parking lot at grade, put in a pedestrian plaza with benches. And do you know that the sales volume in that area, the retail sales increased by 167%? They also took out a curb lane of the street and they installed another little plaza with more benches. That increased sales volume, I'm talking volume of sales, by 14% at all the adjoining businesses. My friends, that just goes to show you that walking is good for everybody's bottom line. I'm going to tell you a story of one of my heroes, Nina Miller. Now, Nina is the manager of a nonprofit society that provides English language skills to folks that don't have English as their first language, for new immigrants to Canada. Now, Nina has a problem. As part of that service, she also has a daycare, so all the kids come to the daycare, and anybody that has been working or knows about daycare regulation is you have to provide an outdoor space for children to play. She didn't have one. Nina's building is located on Commercial Drive. It's in a part of the city and in a part of the Commercial Drive that has a lot of methadone clinics. There's unfortunately open drug activity, a lot of illegal activities happening. And there's no outdoor play area. Now, behind Nina's building was a block-long section of property. It was a jurisdictional nightmare. There were 3 different governments that had jurisdiction over this space because the SkyTrain, the rapid transit for the city, ran above it. So people used it for illegal dumping and other things that I won't mention here. And it was really strange because Nina looked at that space and she said, a playground could go in here. And then she thought about it, and that space connected the bus stop to the SkyTrain station and also to the Commercial Drive businesses, but no one was going to walk through there. So Nina found a solution. She partnered with a nonprofit society called Let Them Be Kids that builds playgrounds all over North America. With Let Them Be Kids, she got the community, the local gardeners, the neighbors, and the neighboring businesses to start fundraising for 3 things: a playground, a connective pathway, and tremendous planting. Well, you know what? That playground, pathway, and the plantings were put in one day in a massive event like a barn raising, with volunteers from all over the city coming to help. At the end of the day, the kids were able to play on the playground. You know, that space is always busy. I'm very lucky to have a friend named Cornelia Oberlander. She's one of the most renowned landscape architect in Canada. And she has a term, and I don't like to take things from people, I want to give her credit for it. She calls invisible mending the act of when you do something that's just so right and you've done it in consultation and process with the community that it looks like it's always been there. That's what that playground and pathway looks like. It's a tremendous example of invisible mending. People now use that stretch all the time to walk from the bus station straight down to the transit and to connect to the businesses. It's always used. Nina knew she had a social responsibility to do the right thing. She knew it was economically feasible. She found a way. And she, again, created the community she wanted to live in. Now, the Surgeon General of the US has just done a general call, I think it was in November of 2015, asking every American to walk 150 minutes a week and to start supporting walkable communities. Now, why? Because every walk you take decreases your likelihood of getting 41 different diseases. And when you walk, it boosts your immune system for 24 hours. And every walk decreases your chance of getting dementia by 13%. Darn it, I should be walking. In Great Britain, 1 out of 5 adults and 1 out of, oh, got that wrong, sorry, 1 out of 6 adults and 1 out of 5 children, I'm talking children under 18, at any time has clinical depression. It costs the National Health Service of Great Britain £235 million a year to take care of people that have clinical depression. There was a massive, massive study that was done. 35,000 people. Half were prescribed the typical antidepressant. The other half were prescribed a placebo, which is a sugar pill, and prescribed walking. Can you guess what the results were? The people that had the sugar pill and were prescribed walking completely outperformed the people that were on the antidepressants. So walking is not only good for your physical, it's terrific for your mental health. And now I'm going to tell you another story that ties in the importance of physical and mental health and walkability. This story is about the Tupper Neighborhood Greenway, and it came out of a terrifically, terrifically awful tragedy. There was a high school student beaten to death outside of his school. The principal, Jennifer Palmer, knew that she had to find a way to deal with the mental and physical health of the kids, the community, the neighborhood. Everybody was really upset. Now, in behind Tupper, which again is on Vancouver's east side, there was a stretch, block long, of street that had been closed for 30 years because of on-car street racing. 30 years it had been closed, nothing, vacant, just a street you can't use. And Jennifer, she got her students together and they contacted City Hall. And she said, you know, we got to do something really special. This has happened. What happened was not a reflection of the school. The school wasn't involved, but we need to find a way to help the community mentally and physically through this, and we need to do it in a way that everyone can be involved. So what we did is we created the Tupper Neighborhood Greenway. And this process, the planning process, was led by students from the Tupper Secondary School. We had meetings. The kids even designed the benches in their woodwork shop, designed and built them. We put planting areas. There's a council circle if you want to have an outside class. There's a culinary garden for the chef that runs the school kitchen. There's places to walk to and through. There's areas for contemplation. And there's places you can leave your bike or just bike through if you want to. It's a place that spiritually healed the community. And it's a place that urbanists call one of the most successful urban spaces in Vancouver. The space has its own blog. You can go and check it online. It's under Tupper Neighborhood Greenway. The Master Gardeners of Vancouver have adopted this space, and they lead massive plant swaps, and they go out and garden. Everybody has big plant exchanges. There are art happenings that happen there. It's always busy. And you know what Jennifer did was that she brought a community together out of a really horrible, tragic accident and created something very beautiful to move through the mental and physical part of spirit through thinking about walkability and open space. You know, I've talked to you about 3 stories from 3 heroes. I've got many more that I have of heroes that have done tremendous things for walkability. You know, these people were not specialists. These are ordinary people like you and me that did extraordinary things because they knew it was important to do. You know, I've tried to show you why I think walking is individually beneficial, economically feasible, socially responsible, morally correct, and just the right thing to do. And what I want to ask you, when you think about your place and your house and your community, what is it that you can do through the power of walking to create the community you want to live in at your place? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.